Welcome everyone to today's Design in Dialogue. It will be a 45 minutes long conversation followed by Q&A, so feel free to put down your questions in the public chat box. We're going to record this and post it on Vimeo shortly, and we're going to mute everyone to ensure background clarity. So let's turn to Glenn Adamson.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everybody, and in fact, good night if you are in a far-flung time zone like our guest today, Aric Chen, coming to us from Shanghai. How are you, Aric?
Good. How are you, Glenn?
Great. What's the scene in Shanghai like?
Well, of course, like everywhere, economically and geopolitically, it's a total mess. But on the day-to-day, I have to say, things are actually okay for the moment. I mean, for the past month, or more, it's basically been a scenario of relative normalcy. I mean, shops and restaurants, bars are all sort of open and busy. So let's see.
So you're actually in that new normal that the rest of us are thinking about in some sense, but we will indeed see. And it's 11 o'clock at night there, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, thanks for staying up. And just to echo something Lucy said there, please put your questions in the chat box as we talk. We'll get back to them at the end of the conversation. And also, if you don't mind letting us know where you're zooming in from, that would be great. We'd just like to know where everybody is. I think that, Aric, you're setting a record for greatest number of time zones between you and me. So that's exciting. We're circling the world here. Before we start in, can you just say a little bit about what you're up to right now? Obviously, we'll get to your relationship with Design Miami at the end of the conversation. But what's your current palette of projects and involvement in design? What's keeping you busy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll talk about one of them a bit later on as well. But I am teaching at Tongji University here in Shanghai, where I started a curatorial lab, and we just started a class this week on culture, shopping, and entertainment in the digital and now post-pandemic age. This was a class that we had planned months ago, sort of taking Rem Koolhaas's famous Harvard Guide to Shopping from 20 years ago as a starting point, but kind of revisiting it in the age of e-commerce and social media, and so on. I'm also working. Believe it or not, I'm working on a show that's now been postponed till early next year at MAT, the Museum of Architecture, Art and Technology in Lisbon, that we started working on again before all this happened, and it was going to be a show on deglobalization. So we certainly have a lot. Well, we were calling it our post-global show, but that's rapidly evolving into deglobal as we speak. So that's giving us lots to think about.
Well, you have your finger on the pulse, I have to say. Can I just ask you for one takeaway idea from the shopping course? Because we did talk a little bit with Alexandra Lang last time about her new book, which is about malls and the future of the shopping mall, if there is a future of the shopping mall. And I wonder if you have a single sort of memorable idea to share with us about what's going to happen with commerce in this post-digital, post-seemingly everything age that we're entering.
Yeah, well, we just started this. It's a research studio that we just started on Wednesday, and I'm actually really looking forward to seeing what the students, who are all quite young, well, they're master's students, but still all in their 20s, who've grown up in this completely different environment than you and I, Glenn, sort of their take on it. And we just had them do sort of initial kind of warm-up presentations on Wednesday, the first day of class. And it was already fascinating to just sort of look at the different ways they kind of define culture even. We're of course getting some Marxist critiques and so on and so forth. So we'll see how it goes. We'll share. Well, hopefully we'll do a publication so we can share what we find more broadly.
When you're teaching those subjects in China, are Marxist critiques, do they have the feeling of orthodoxy, or do they have the feeling of radicalism, or a little bit of both?
They feel sort of very of the moment, actually. Marxist critiques, in the sense that a lot of people are sort of questioning the very tenets of capitalism in a way that has gone much more mainstream than I would have imagined, even 10 years ago.
And that's true in China as well. Huh, fascinating. Okay, well let's get into some images because we have quite a few topics to consider, and we're going to be organizing this in a roughly chronological sort of Aric Chen, this is your life kind of way, looking particularly at three projects, one of which is a big one, the development of the collection at M Plus in Hong Kong, and then we'll get on to a show called States of Extremes that you did at the Design Museum Holon in Israel, and then we'll wrap up with a short conversation about what you're doing now in Miami. But take us back first to your time with M Plus, this incredibly ambitious and innovative project that was built or is being built in Hong Kong.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, M Plus is a museum for visual culture, as we called it, but visual culture really as an umbrella term for art, design, and architecture, which was the area that I sort of looked after, and moving image. And the scope is 20th century till now, and the idea was to build a collection, and through that collection and programming, sort of new discourses or narratives of visual culture, really taking a transnational approach, but sort of recentering a lot of those stories from our vantage point in the region, being Hong Kong, China, East Asia, Asia, etc. And so what you see there, I joined M Plus at the end of 2012. When it was just really, I was one of the first group of hirees. It was just like 12 of us when I started. Now there are over 200 people, and of course it was just an empty site with with no building design even. But these are a couple of shots that I took. Sorry, they're very bad iPhone shots. On two different days, obviously, when I was in Hong Kong this past March, of the building, which is almost done. It's designed by Herzog and de Meuron, and you can see it kind of evokes Hong Kong's sort of podium and tower typology, but in a very attenuated way. The tower is very thin, like almost diaphanous, as you can see on the image on the right. The entire thing is sort of covered in glazed ceramic. The horizontal is the main gallery floor. There's a little concrete sawtooth building in the back, which is conservation and storage, and then the tower with other functions like offices, etc., research center.
And there's an incredible amount of square footage for gallery space. That's one of the big takeaways that I had speaking to you about it earlier. It's just huge.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not, it's comfortable. It's about 150,000 about 150,000 square feet.
A cozy 150,000. And do you have or do they have a projected opening date, or is this all now thrown into disarray?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there are, like everyone, there are question marks that sort of pop up now and then, but right now it's still looking to be on track to opening first half of next year, probably, June or so.
Okay, so you're picking out your outfit for the opening. Can you tell us a little bit how you approached building the collection, because you were really starting from scratch, as I understand it. There was really nothing in the collection when you began.
Yeah, and so what you see here are really a bunch of random images that I threw together last night, kind of based on what was readily available. And I think that we definitely had a strategy and kind of, let's say, a vision, if you will, for the collection, but that scope was really quite and very purposely expansive. So, it was well, 20th century till now, but global, with greater emphasis as you get closer to where we are, in order to tell these design and architecture narratives, the lesser known narratives within the region, while also kind of revisiting very familiar global narratives from where we were where we are in the region. And so the scope really included everything from your sort of classic canonical works and masterpieces to sort of informal design, social practices, of course, graphic design, product industrial, architecture, objects and archival materials, a little bit of digital, a little bit of fashion. To be honest, with digital, we sort of kicked the can down the road a little bit because there's so many complexities with collecting digital, and we had so much to do already with the historical collection. But really looking at not just Hong Kong and China, but of course Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Southeast Asia, South Asia. We started looking at other regions as well as they relate to the kind of stories we're trying to tell from Europe, North America, Latin America. So it was really quite broad. And of course, people always ask how we started, and really the answer is, you just start. like a collection has no ending, it only has a beginning. So you just have to begin, sort of lay stakes, and that as time goes by, and as you collect more, and as you're able to collect more, things become available. You kind of start filling things in and start developing these networks of ideas and relationships.
And did you think about the M+ collection as contributing something unique to the, if you like, the world collection of design museums? In other words, obviously you were aiming at a global reach, so it wasn't a regional collection, but was there something that you were trying to do that was distinctive, that might be different from the V&A or the Cooper Hewitt or the Design Museum collection, et cetera?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was really the kind of mandate, if you will, of the museum, was to kind of add another voice to a global conversation that has been mostly institution-wise, that has been mostly, of course, consisted of voices from the Euro-American sort of sphere, right? And I mean, we weren't. I mean, we were always very clear that we're a museum. We weren't a museum of Asian visual culture. That, like, this was not an attempt to sort of define an Asianness to anything. It was really more about being able to talk about design and architecture and art, moving image broadly, but really from a different perspective, to really add a diversity of viewpoints and also knowledge bases to a global conversation. And I think the ambition of the museum was to kind of be that voice, or that first voice in Asia, because if you think about especially 20th century and contemporary fields of visual culture, there hasn't been that kind of investment in an institution, in a sort of sizable institutional perspective, rooted in something like a collection in our region up till now. It's especially for design and architecture.
Mm-hmm. Would you be able to talk a little bit about the professional audience that you had in mind? Because of course, this is going to be very much a museum for the general public, but I'm always struck by the fact that every art and design museum has to simultaneously serve this very insider crowd, very knowledgeable group, and in a way give them support in their professional aspirations at the same time as having that public offer. It's almost like what Charles Jenks called double coding in architecture, this kind of two channels of communication that need to interweave together. And I wonder how you thought about that at M+.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, we definitely saw ourselves as having a kind of a responsibility to act as that kind of interface between the designers, architects, artists, filmmakers, et cetera, who are making things, and a broader audience. I mean, especially for design and architecture, and especially for architecture as a kind of discursive field. I mean, of course, Hong Kong is a city full of architecture, but it's often been very sort of commercially driven, and so I mean, that really was the impetus, for the museum being formed, was to sort of add these other layers of kind of discussion and meaning in ways that support the people who are creating this meaning.
Mm-hmm. And so here we're looking at a prototype show, essentially giving people a sense of what you were doing as you were doing it back in 2014. Can you talk a little bit about these? I don't want to use the word pop-up because it makes it sound small and modest, but it was a sort of ephemeral sort of catch yourself in the act of thinking through the collection, kind of an exercise, as I understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, the genesis. So at this point, we were just using temporary spaces in Hong Kong, and this exhibition was at a space called Artistry in the Tai Kung Shing area of the city. And what sort of prompted this show was we were told, because so we had just had the competition for the museum building. And we were told that we needed to do an exhibition, about the winning design, about Herzog and de Meuron's winning design, and also the other finalists, the other shortlisted entries, which were by Renzo Piano, Snow Heda, Sana Shigeru Ban, and oh God, and one more. Sorry.
My goodness, that's quite a list. That's a very impressive salon de refusé.
But sort of back to your previous question. I mean, at this point, M Plus had just gotten a very big donation of the Uli Sig collection of contemporary Chinese art, which is really a massive sort of founding collection for the museum, and everyone thought that we were just a museum of Chinese art, and so we wanted to sort of use that exhibition we were told to do about our building to kind of jumpstart the architecture collection, as well as sort of tell everyone that this is something that the museum was doing too. So in a matter of like 8 months, so I just started, and basically in a matter of 8 months we started, we built the beginnings of an architecture collection with about in this show we had about, I think, 80 works, but drawn from a few hundred that we were able to acquire, to begin to show our kind of the scope, as well as the kind of strategy or methodology of collecting that we were taking, sort of trying to diminish the distinctions between archival and sort of archival works and objects, let's say, while also drawing connections between the local and global, and sort of tracing transnational networks, and what we meant by all this stuff that I'm spewing right now about recentering narratives and so on and so forth.
Can you talk a little bit more about and here we see another show that was done in 2017, which is much more object focused. And I wanted to ask you, maybe before you talk about the occasion of this exhibition, to talk a little bit more about the challenges specifically of collecting architecture, and how you thought of that as blurring the line to this kind of object collection, where you have something that you can sort of put on a platform, even if it's intended to be sat on, and still have it feel like it's kind of itself. Whereas with architecture, so often there's this provisionality to the way that it's displayed. And I wonder if you had particular strategies for tackling that and then creating dialogues with the kinds of objects that we see here.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you really hit on the sort of $60,000 question, which is, what does it mean to collect architecture, right? The $60,000 question for those of us who who are in this line of work. The short answer is you have to basically just do everything on a case-by-case basis. Like obviously architecture is something that for which you're always, except in rare cases, you're never actually collecting the the thing itself, but rather the sort of mediation of the thing, the representation of the thing, the process of the thing being, let's say, like a building. I mean, and urbanism gets even more complicated, and then when you get into other sort of expanded practices of architecture, then it gets even further complicated. So it's really just a matter of, I mean, if there were to be a formula, I guess it would be, what is the intention of the author, what is the context in which it was made, and then what's available, and then how do you bring all of that together in the best possible way, knowing that it's imperfect. Now, to get to your other point, which I thought was interesting about, pointing out that with the objects we put them on pedestals, even if they're meant to be sat on, and so on and so forth. We of course debated um, how sort of orthodox we should be in terms of displaying things, and at least for me, like I'm definitely biased because I did my master's thesis on Philip Johnson's 1934 machine art exhibition and the sort of roots in Dadaism, right? But also, like, but the power of dissociating something from its use. And for us, we thought it was important to at least start with that, because the majority of our audience is not used to seeing chairs in a museum. And so there was still value in actually creating a distance that then really prompts one to ask, why is this on a pedestal? And then hopefully begin to look a little bit more closely at things they might usually take for granted.
And so do you want to just say a little bit about this show that we're looking at? Because this is another similar exercise of showing what you were up to as you were doing it.
Yeah. So I mean, of course, my time at M+, which was from 2012 to 2018, that was spent building, of course, the hardware and software of the museum, the team, the programming, the collection, but also, of course, the audience. And because it is a project that is so different for Hong Kong and perhaps even the region, we really wanted to take every opportunity we could, to just really show people, what we're doing. So just like that first show was about, showing what we mean by collecting architecture from the sort of in the M+ way, this was playing a similar role for design and objects. So we had these little moments where we had these kind of mini narratives, started, and what you see here on that sort of upper left image is sort of the end of the kind of mid-20th century Japanese sort of story, but as it relates to kind of again transnational networks, because I won't get too much into it, but as many of you probably know, Charlotte Perriand had a very important, influential trip at the invitation of Junzo Sakakura, who she had met in the office of Le Corbusier when they were both there, and she went to Japan to sort of consult for the Ministry of Trade in 1941, and that had a profound impact on a very young Sori Yanagi. But she was influenced by Japanese design, like that sort of alto-esque but bamboo chair that you see by Ubunji Kidokoro from 1937. So she was influenced by what she saw in Japan, but he was influenced by Finland. But then she influenced Yanagi, et cetera, et cetera. If you go even further, those sort of lanterns, those Noguchi lanterns you see, that was kind of a hinge piece. That's a beautiful Perriand light stand that incorporates Noguchi lights that she made when she was in Brazil. But that acts as a sort of pivot piece that gets us into kind of the beginnings of a kind of post-independence modernism story in India. You can kind of glimpse a little bit of Chandigarh there, I'm sure, but that big cabinet in the back is Doshi Balkrishna, who designed that for the Milliners Association building by Le Corbusier in Ahmedabad. And of course, Doshi then went on to become, first generation post-independence Indian architect, sort of granddaddy of post-independence Indian architecture, and the story kind of continues from there. So we showed little bits and pieces like that, but we also had, Hong Kong plastics. I mean, there's a really fascinating story behind the Hong Kong plastics industry of the 50s through the 70s and even 80s. We began to look at design under socialism or under communism, designed in the Mao period, and trying to, we didn't get as far as I wanted, but sort of trying to trace how the Bauhaus kind of morphed into something else in China via the Eastern Bloc. In the 1950s, especially, all the way to sort of more contemporary practices, which you see in the image on the right, which are works which are much more recent works.
Hmm. So a lot of the strategy, it sounds like, is about these kind of ricocheting lines of influence and conversation that have always been happening in design, and really emphasizing the global conversational nature of the discipline. So that seems like a big takeaway message of the way that you approached it.
Yes, and of course, globalization has taken on different connotations since.
Yeah.
I mean, the museum really it was a product of sort of the golden age of globalization euphoria, and it'll be interesting to see uh, how how things evolve. Yeah.
Yeah, it might come to seem like a kind of monument to the pre-COVID way of thinking about things as we merge
It's,
painfully into a new approach, new methodologies. So then there were a couple of, well, to me they seem famous. I'm not sure. Maybe they're only famous in the design scene, but there were a couple of famous acquisitions that you made that we'll talk about. One of which is this amazing full interior of Kuramadas, and then we'll talk a little bit about the way that you went about collecting neon signs, which is a really distinctive and innovative project that's much more wide ranging. But first, let's talk about this very focused acquisition of this extremely interesting and important interior.
Yeah, well, coincidentally enough, your very own Mark Benda had a big role, or had a very important role in this. I have a thing, let's say, for Shiro Kuramata, the Japanese designer, and Mark Mark knew about that and was very helpful in my quest to build the museum's very substantial by now, I must say, collection of Kuramata. And one of the things Mark did was he knew about this interior. So Kuramata, of course, is known for his Miss Blanche chair, et cetera, et cetera. But in his day, in the beginning in the 60s, but especially in the 70s and 80s, he designed about 300, 400 interiors. Clubs, bars, restaurants, shops for Issey Miyake and Esprit. And this was one of the very few surviving interiors. It's a sushi bar designed in 1988, designed and built in 1988 in Tokyo, called the Kiyotomo Sushi Bar. And it closed, it was in operation until about, I think, 2003, if I'm not mistaken, when it suddenly closed and the owner sort of disappeared. And Richard Schlagman, the now former owner of Phaidon, the book publisher, who was also a big Kuramata fan, took over the lease for this space with the aim of reopening it as some kind of food concept. Now that never worked out for any number of reasons, and for 10 years, the space was empty, and Richard was just paying rent on it, and he was right about to just auction off, very painfully and reluctantly auction off the furnishings, and then close it when Mark connected us about this interior. And Richard said, do you want the furniture? And I said, well, why don't we get the whole thing? and so the entire interior, as well as that facade of hammer painted steel, is now currently in storage in Hong Kong, and will be reinstalled in the M+ galleries next year.
And will it be installed as a kind of period room, as far as you know? It's like something you look into, or is it something that people can actually occupy in some way?
Yeah, well, museums with collections have take their conservation issues very, very seriously. So yes, I mean, yes, it'll basically be a period room that you can look into. But I'm hoping there will at least be some sort of special occasions in which people can sort of use it more actively.
It's amazing that you were able to acquire the facade as well as the interior, because it really gives you the integrated inside outside logic of the design, which is so important. Obviously, just these two images show you that. And just speaking of street presence, you also did this amazing thing of collecting what I would call a branch of vernacular design, which is to say the neon signage that Hong Kong and other parts of Asia are so well known for.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, it was really important to us. It was really important to us to be, a museum that was very much rooted in Hong Kong, and And even for those who have never been to Hong Kong, I'm sure your image of Hong Kong, is filled with neon signs, right? The image of neon is really kind of just embedded in the image of Hong Kong, in the popular imagination. Now, those the neon signs in Hong Kong have been rapidly disappearing, and in fact, when you go to Hong Kong today, you'll see really quite few of them. And there are a number of reasons for this. Partly it's regulatory, partly it has to do with just new commercial development. There's no place for neon signs on shiny new skyscrapers and shopping malls, but also there's the issue of obsolescence. They're being replaced by LEDs, which are sort of more energy efficient, and so on and so forth. So we got when I soon after I started at M+, we were sort of thinking about other ways of approaching design and collecting design, and expanding ways of thinking about design and visual culture. And a colleague of mine at the time, Tobias Berger, forwarded me this article in one of the local papers about how this iconic Sammy's Kitchen sign, which is huge. I mean, it's like about, I think, 12 to 15 feet wide and maybe 6 to 8 feet tall, that had hung above Queens Road West in the Sai Ying Pun district for since 1978. This article was about how one of the government agencies was forcing the owners to take it down for ostensibly for sort of safety reasons. And of course, he was like, if this is coming down, we should collect it. And long story short, it took 2 or 3 years, but we did wind up getting it. And it needs a fair amount of restoration work, so it may not be up when the museum opens in June, but it'll hopefully be up soon thereafter.
And then you actually, in a way, did a kind of research initiative or audit of this genre of design. So it wasn't just the one emblematic thing, it was also studying it as a phenomenon.
Yeah, so I mean, we had such an immediate visceral response to this sign. Like, there was no question that we should have it in the collection. But so even after we made that decision, we thought, well, maybe we should think about or explore a little more why it is that this seems so obvious to us. And being a museum without a building, this was a very good opportunity to also do our first online exhibition. So we launched this in 2014, neonsigns.hk. It's still up if anyone wants to have a look. But we wanted to, I'm a former journalist, and we wanted to, as they say in journalism, we wanted to flood the field on neon signs. So we, commissioned essays, slideshows, videos, interviews, artist commissions, looking at neon signs as a marriage of craft and industry, as a cinematic device, like in the films of Wong Kar-wai. We did an interview with Christopher Doyle, who is the cinematographer who worked on many of Wong Kar-wai's early films. The making of neon signs. Again, we had artists do new commissions, and then knowing that we wanted to start collecting neon signs, but also realizing that we didn't have the resources to catalog, to archive them all. We decided this would be a really fun time to do like an open source call to the public for help. So we created this neon map, which you can kind of see on this image, where we invited everyone to take photos of neon signs, and that was pinned to this map. And so that then formed a record for the signs that were still existing in Hong Kong at that point.
It's interesting to look at that project alongside this plug-in city drawing. This is an example of the more archival collecting, because in a way, the emphasis on populist visual culture is exactly what Archigram was reacting to. You think of it as a kind of pop architecture. So it's a way of also demonstrating there's a continuity between what we might consider the kind of canonical elite history of architecture and its actual street practice.
Yeah, no, totally. And yes, I mean, this was my last sort of big acquisition for M+, which was the Archigram archive, the archive of the 1960s, early 70s experimental architecture group in London. And I'm really glad, Glenn, well, I'm not surprised, but it was great that you immediately caught on to the connection, because of course, when I first proposed this, everyone was like, what? Which is actually the same. The same was true of the sushi bar and the neon cow. But you know, this was a this acquisition was, to be very honest, to be very honest, a hard sell at first. Now no one questions it. But it took about, I'm not kidding, it took almost 5 years of kind of warming people up and to say no, and convincing them, and also to say nothing of just the 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 complexities on the archigram side, because there's 6 members of, you know, and errors and so on and so forth, and it's a lot of material. It has
And was there any dissent or controversy on the London side? The idea of this archive of arguably the most important radical group of architects ever to practice in 20th century Britain, for it to be going so far away?
Well, funny you ask, because you know, after almost 5 years of sort of trying to kind of convince people on the, you know, on the museum in Hong Kong side, you know, both the public, our board members, and multiple committees that this had to go to, you know, the my bosses. After and just to say, again, to say nothing of sorting out all the legal and other issues, we had finally done it. It was approved, signed, sealed, paid, and then suddenly the British government declared this a national treasure.
Oh.
And we had to go through this whole other process of they were God, I forgot all the sort of verbiage.
Well, it's called an export stop, right? Is
yes,
the term of art?
yes.
Yes.
There was a hearing and all this stuff to sort of determine whether or not to grant us an export license. In the end, the UK Secretary of State decided to grant the export license to us officially on a technicality, because these rules only apply to works more than 50 years old, and the archive span is, you know, the span of the archive is both, you know, older and younger, more and less than 50 years in age. So officially it was because they didn't want to see the archive split.
Right, so you sneaked it under the wire.
Yes, well, so that's now in Hong Kong as well. Yeah.
It's so fascinating because, you know, we're so used to the reverse of this conversation, like the Elgin marbles in the British Museum, should they be returned? And the idea of, you know, I don't know, the ceramics in the Percival David collection would be a great example of Chinese treasures brought over to Europe and to London in an earlier time. And so now we have this idea of a kind of bilateral or multilateral movement of these so-called cultural treasures. It's fascinating to be involved with that.
Yeah, I mean, there were some possible ironies that some people did point out. But regardless, I mean, most of the archive, because of the work of the work of others, most of the archive is already online. And of course, with Archigram's work, you know, a lot of its value is in the image. So it's not like it's being locked away, you know, and sealed away.
Well, I'm just going to move us on from M+, if you don't mind, to talk about our next subject, just in the interest of time, which is this exhibition at Holon in Israel. So this is you operating in the capacity of guest curator for a single one-off exhibition. So, and I have to say, it seems extremely relevant now. It's done in a very recent past, and you know, seems kind of prescient already. So, can you tell us a little bit about it? States of Extremes.
Yeah, so I mean, the show is actually still up. I mean, the museum is closed now, but once it reopens, hopefully in the next few weeks, the show will be up. We think through October. So if anyone's in Tel Aviv, if anyone's able to go to Tel Aviv, we're in Tel Aviv already. So this is the Design Museum Holon, which opened in 2010. It was Ron Arad's first building. And I was on the curatorial team for the inaugural exhibition, which was just meant to be a general survey of of design, just to sort of introduce design to the museum's new audience. And that show is called The State of Things. And Maya Dvash, the chief curator of the museum who worked on this show with me, was kind enough to invite me to do the 10-year anniversary show. The State of Things 2.0, and sort of looking at how design and design practice has changed. Obviously, I think we can all agree that a lot of design has moved, sort of away from the object to some extent, and towards kind of critical and other practices, such that, I mean, design is not as much as about things as it is about responding to a condition. And so the question was, what is our current condition? And when you think about, everything from extreme weather to extreme political polarization, extreme inequality, it seemed to us that we had gone from a state of things to a state of extremes, and that's the direction we took the show in. As a show that that doesn't so much tackle any of those issues like climate change or various political issues in particular, but rather that kind of draws from the mechanisms of extremes, the sort of spiraling feedback loops, the kind of cycles of pushback and backlash, and so on that drive extremes, or that drive us to extremes, and what role design plays in kind of articulating, mediating, hopefully moderating, but sometimes even exacerbating that.
Okay, so let's just look at a few of the practices that you brought into that show. It's extremely interesting. I guess a very forward-looking anticipation of the state that we're all in now. I mean, talk about an extreme condition. So we have, for example, this idea about color in relation to architecture.
Oh yeah, so I mean, this was an installation in the courtyard by UN Studio, who was just developed with Monopole, a Swiss paint maker, a pigment called Coolest White, and it's meant to sort of, reflect as much of the sun's sort of UV and other sort of heat-generating waves as possible in order to kind of mitigate the urban heat island effect. And this is just a nice sort of introduction, I think, for the exhibition, where we had an installation with sort of the Coolest White and black, and then what you see there is we had an actual heat sensing camera on it that sort of showed the difference. But it was a very kind of rhetorical introduction, or sort of a visually rhetorical kind of way of introducing the show.
Also, I love that curatorial gesture of that live feed, because it sort of tests the proposition of the project, which is not something that prototypical architecture usually has subjected to it,
Yes, and that's to UN Studio's credit.
And so here you have Atelier van Lieshout's installation.
Yeah, well, I mean, the show had about 120 works, and again, this is just an installation shot, but it was, they were sort of divided into the sections called spiraling and polarization, the sort of pushback and feedback, the pushback and backlash, extremer, and new normals. And then we had a sort of extreme lab, which is more about sort of new materials and ways of thinking of materials. I just like this installation shot. The Atelier van Lieshout, again, this is a bit more of a rhetorical project, but this was these are three pieces from a series called End of Everything, where Joop van Lieshout created these sort of destruction machines that put materials under stresses in different ways, until they reach a sort of point of breakage or failure to create sculptural works. But then we also had sort of speculative films by Liam Young looking at surveillance. We had Norman, the world's first psychopath AI from the MIT Media Lab, to look at the sort of feedback loops of inherent bias in AI. This was a project that I wanted to point out because it was very sort of resonant. This was based on a project called The New Vote by a young Dutch designer named Rudy van Belkom. His premise is, in many democracies, the party system really just sort of feeds cycles of partisanship, because as different parties sort of um, uh, uh, as they kind of respond to their bases, their platforms get increasingly kind of radical, and party-based electoral systems then force people to choose between different extremes. So what he did was he developed a modular voting system that allows people to vote based on issues and questions versus party platforms. So we actually did a version where we asked him to work with Merav Perez, an Israeli designer, to create an Israeli version of this voting system. Now, the show opened a day before Israel's third election is in about 9 months, if I'm not mistaken. There was this long-running and ongoing impasse, right? So it really kind of, it really resonated with in that environment. And what you see here is the sort of these panels where they have the different questions, the questions about Jerusalem and occupied territory, gay marriage, all sorts of things, and then people were asked to vote based on by putting these sort of colored stickers on their position.
Mm.
Yeah.
Very attractive alternative at the moment, given the kind of gridlock that polarization is bringing to so many countries, but also an incredible, simple visualization exercise, just sort of design of information. Here we have our beloved Forma Fantasma, the design duo from Netherlands, well, Italian-Dutch design duo.
Okay, so yeah, I see we're running out of time, so I'll just very quickly. And Design Miami is still happening now, so there's there'll be hopefully plenty of chances to talk about this in other contexts. But yes, last year I took on the newly created position of curatorial director for Design Miami for both the Basel and Miami fairs. We sort of brought different themes to each fair, trying to kind of return to the fair's role as the global forum for design, as we call it. For Basel, we wanted to look at we wanted to look at the ways in which designers are making us sort of rethink things in the context of the environmental crisis and the way in which human activity is sort of changing the nature of the planet and even the nature of nature itself, right? So in the Swiss mountains, or in Basel, we looked at earth. And then in Miami, we did water. For the Design at Large exhibition in Basel, we had about 8 installations where designers like Forma Fantasma, Erez Nevipana, and Shahar Livna, which are the 3 that we're showing, were among those who questioned or who looked at the kind of blurring distinctions between consumption and production, raw material and waste, and artificial and natural, whether with these, here Shahar's metamorphism project, she combined bits of plastic with minerals and formed them under heat and pressure to sort of simulate the Earth's geological processes to create a new material, given the fact that plastic is now part of the Earth's stratigraphy, and we can maybe think of it as being part of part of sort of now embedded in the resources that we might.
This idea of plastic as the material that marks the onset of the Anthropocene, so a different moment in geological time that's marked by the presence of plastic in the Earth rather than other forms of geological change.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. And can you say just a little bit of about, just as we're drawing to a close here, what your actual role is at Design Miami? Is a little bit surprising, I think, for people who might think of an art fair or design fair as an exclusively commercial proposition to have a curatorial director at all. And I'm not sure how much precedent there is for that, and also how much you're defining the role as you're undertaking it. But can you just say a little bit about how you think about it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have to say, like, I think it does seem a little bit unusual for a design fair, and I have to really, like, I was really impressed, by Design Miami's boldness, just the fact that they were doing this, because I think it really says something about their commitment to really to developing, the conversations around these objects. It's not just selling well, I mean, in some ways they have to, because I think design does require a bit more explanation sometimes, right? And you need to be in a constant process of sort of, let's say, education or sharing, where you where people are kind of where you engage people about what it is that that these objects tell us, and what goes behind them, and what their relevance, what their relevance is, because it is so easy to take them for granted, or to just think of them as really expensive furniture, and it really goes beyond that. So I think the curatorial director role um, is driven by that, and it's still a role that's evolving. But for me, I mean, it really is about kind of setting the tone, right? Because in the end, and that's really what a curator does. I mean, we're more kind of ringmasters, so to speak, than anything else. I think we're sort of there to kind of act as a catalyst to sort of bring out the best, in others, to create a conversation. And that's really what the role is uh, for Design Miami. I mean, on a practical level, I curate the Design at Large exhibition. I work with some of the galleries and partners and curios on their content. I help organize the talks, and and this and that. But it's really about generating or sparking people to think in different ways.
Well, we have a nice little poetic ending that you're going to have to explain to me, Aric. This is the very calm video that Aric wanted to show at the end of our conversation.
It's a little noisy. Sorry. Yeah. So in Basel we did earth. In Miami we did water. And one of the projects or sort of things that we did that I was really blown away by, was this video which we had projected big at the entrance. This is a project by an art science duo in Miami called Coral Morphologic, Colin Ford and JD McKay. And what they did was they installed a camera in Biscayne Bay to record the coral reefs there. Now, what everyone has to kind of keep in mind is that at a time when coral reefs all around the world are dying at an alarming rate, apparently the coral reefs in the very polluted Biscayne Bay are thriving, and it's a really surprising phenomenon that scientists are investigating. But just days before Design Miami opened, this camera was installed in Biscayne Bay, and okay, so this was meant to be a live stream, but there were some technical problems. So it was actually what we projected was recorded, but it was almost live streamed. It was
recent news from the coral reef.
Yes, it was very, very fresh, just hours old footage, and it was just amazing to kind of bring that scene, in an otherwise depressing conversation, into the fair, as a scene, of such a vibrant, hopeful ecosystem that was right beneath our noses in Miami.
Well, it's also another very prescient project, because so many people have talked about the way that the coronavirus has let nature back in a sense. We do have opportunity for questions now, if people have them. I do have one last question for you, Aric, which is just a simple one, which I'm sure many people are wondering about themselves. Do you have any idea what's happening with Design Miami later this year? Is it planning to? Is the current plan for it to proceed? Are you still working on projects?
Yeah, I mean, we are moving ahead now. The Basel Fair, which is concurrent with Art Basel, in June, was postponed till September. I don't think it would surprise anyone if I said there are uncertainties around that, but a decision will be made in the next week or two,
Okay.
based on advice from the Swiss government, and so on and so forth about that. As far as Miami in December goes, we are moving ahead. In the meantime, the fair is launching a new digital platform. Surprise, surprise! But I am really excited about this. Like we're sort of doing it on the fly, but it's looking really good. So that'll be up, and we are looking at also other formats that we were already exploring before all this happened. I mean, as everybody has been widely commented, I mean, the pandemic maybe isn't changing the world so much as it is accelerating processes that were already underway in many respects. But that applies to Design Miami as well. We were looking at other ways of rethinking the fair, because I mean, I think it's been, the fair model has been questioned like a lot, even pre-pandemic, and I do think, if there's a silver lining, we can use this. We can all use this as an opportunity to make some changes that might make everyone stronger in the end.
Okay, so let's take a couple of questions. We have a little bit of time. First, from Adriana Kurtzer. Hey, Adriana. Great to see you there in the chat box. Do you want to ask Aric directly about the book that he did on Brazilian modern design? Adriana, are you there?
Hi, sorry for the delay.
Hey.
I had to remove my security sticker from the camera. Hi, Aric. Yes, I did have a question, because I know that Aric authored the book, let's say, before his experience at M+, and then now hearing him talk about the experience at M+ as this kind of amazing transnational exploration. I guess I was wondering if anything from the experience from the book came into the M+ experience, if the already transnational reality of Brazilian design, and especially in the modernist period, kind of trained you to then think a little bit more in this M+ way. I don't know. It's a very open-ended, curious question.
No. Totally. And in fact, I talked, although it wasn't out yet, I talked a lot about that book during my interview with them because it was really quite similar. So this book is called Brazil Modern, and it was I wrote the text, and through that text, it was my novice's effort to kind of write a history of mid 20th or of 20th century Brazilian furniture, again in a global context. But I did my best, as an outsider. But hopefully, being an outsider gives you a little bit of critical distance as well. So maybe there's an advantage to be an outsider. But as an outsider, to try and write that history, but in a kind of Brazil in a Brazil centric sort of way. And so yeah, that book and the research that I did on the book did help a lot in sort of training me, as you say, for M+.
Great. Okay, thanks, Adriana. It's great to see you. We're former colleagues from the Museum of Arts and Design. It's really great to see you tuning in. Just a really quick question. Madhvi Subramanian asked whether you said very much in passing that the M+ facade is made of ceramic. Could you just explain a little bit more about what that means? Because it's not just tiles, obviously.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a mostly reinforced concrete structure, facade, with these concrete fins. But around those fins are these dark green glazed terracotta tiles that were actually fired and glazed in outside Florence with this very sort of famous tile works, which I can't remember the name of the company right now, but yeah, so it's concrete clad in these kind of semi-cylindrical terracotta glazed tiles.
Amazing. Okay, and then one last question, which we just got in by text. This is a kind of a wide open question for you, Aric, but it's about the future of curating, and so.
That's your question, Glenn.
We were talking about it before, and somebody wanted me to follow up on it. So, it's obviously not possible to generalize about the future of curating in general and what the coronavirus will bring, but I'm wondering what you think it will mean for you as a curator and how it might change your incredible globe-trotting practice. Do you think that you're going to have to readjust your strategies and the way that you think about your own professional activity, or have you not started to come to grips with that yet?
Of course, the real honest answer to the question is I have no idea. But I think, but in terms of readjustment, um, obviously we all have to readjust in different ways. But fortunately, um, I would argue that readjusting is what curators are good at, right? I mean, what we do is we work with different kinds of material and different kinds of contexts, both institutional, geographic, and cultural, with different kinds of audiences, with different kinds of expectations, and so we're nonstop flexible, and so hopefully that'll prepare all of us for whatever lies ahead.
Okay, I like that idea of the curator as an adaptive creature. Maybe we do well in a coral reef too, but I'm afraid that's all the time we have. So Aric, thank you. That was amazing to have that incredible transit through all these projects. And I definitely now will always think of you as the ringmaster of the great circus that is design. So I guess that makes the designers the lions. The lions and the clowns perhaps, and we need to sort them out. But it's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, it was really fun. Thanks so much, Glenn, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
And hey, good night. I hope we haven't kept you up past your bedtime.
Not at all. No, it's perfect.